Okay, so let's get this little stream started. First off, before I actually go ahead and answer those homework questions, I'm going to start going over some just big concepts in Java that I know a lot of the people in my class are struggling with. So I'm imagining transitioning over from another language, it might not be as clear as possible. So in a second, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide my face right there, and then you're just going to see the desktop, and we're going to talk about some things. So goodbye me. Okay. First thing to understand about Java is that it's really big on what we call object-oriented programming. Not to say that other programs, or I should say programming languages, aren't object-oriented, but Java is very intentional about this is what we're really meant to do. So there's two basic types of classes that you're going to make. So a class is basically a big chunk of code, which is saying either we want to create some objects, or it's just a way to package a bunch of methods that you're going to want to use in the future. Oftentimes, you'll see both of these interpretations mixed together, but when you're writing code, you want to be thinking in one of these two mindsets. Are you actually creating an object, or are you just executing a function or a method? So let's look at these two individually. So first, basically an object is a new type of data. So you're familiar with numbers, you're familiar with strings, you're familiar with booleans. These are all different types of data. And an object is basically a way to bundle a lot of these together in a new way. So right now, above the main method, this is where you would tell the computer or tell another user what are the important things to keep track of that your object has. So we'll just pretend that you're a college student right now. So if you're a college student, you have a name. So you're going to have a name that you want to keep track of. And now I'm forgetting that in Java you need to actually tell the computer what type of variable you're using. So I have to tell it that name is a string, okay? Another thing you might have is you might have a student ID number. So let's say this is an int, and I'm going to call it ID. And then finally, something like if you are living in a dorm setting, which I know you're not, but it's a popular option, is that you might have a dorm. So I will say, and this will be, again, a string, it's a word, and we'll just call it dorm. So essentially, if I were to create a new student object, it would have all three of these attributes. And the class would be in charge of how we get these pieces of information and also how we change these pieces of information. So now we're ready to talk about why I use this keyword called private. Private means that you have to very intentionally grab your code. You can't just accidentally change things about an object. Its information's private. You have to go through and actually create a new method that allows you to access that information. So I'm going to show you a quick way that Eclipse actually does that for us. I can click right here, right click. I can go to source, and it'll say generate getters and setters. And what this does is it lets me choose all of my instance variables, the things that make my object specific to my object, and it will auto-generate methods that allow us to manipulate it. So, for instance, if I wanted to get the name of my student, I'd have to say student.getName. If I wanted to change the name of my student, I'd say student.setName, and then I would put the new name inside here. The other two instance variables, they work the same way. But like I said, this is just making sure that no random part of our program can actually accidentally change the student. We'd have to be intentionally calling one of these methods to get the job done. So let's, what we'll do down here is in the main method, I'm going to create a student. So I will say, in this case, it's not actually called student, it's called object blueprint. So let's just go ahead and change this. If I call this guy student, it's going to give me an error, and it's going to say, hey, this thing doesn't exist. So rename it to student.java. Yep, that's what I want. Okay. So down here in the main, this is where we can actually run some code. I could say student, and then I'll just use your name. So Frank equals a new student. I need a space there. New student. And here we go. So right now, what I've done is I've taught the computer I want to make a new student object, and if I want to use it in the future, I need to type in Frank. What I haven't done is I haven't told it what its name is, what its ID is, and where it lives. So this is what's called a constructor, that we know what the object should look like. We now know how to get information from the object, but we don't actually know how to make an object yet. Luckily, Eclipse takes care of that for us as well. If I right click again and I go to source and I go to generate constructor, it'll go ahead and give us a way to make an object for us. So again, all three of these are selected. I'll go OK. And so here we go. This is saying if you want to make a student, you need to tell me its name, you need to tell me its ID, and you need to tell me its dorm. So what this is doing is it's filling in all three values for you so that you can actually make multiple students. So I could say here, I could say Frank, and then I'll just give you a random ID number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And your dorm is, let's just call it Fullerton, even though you don't actually go to class there, but if there isn't a dorm somewhere in Fullerton, that'd be surprising. Okay, let's just make another student for fun. I'll do me, right? Equals new student. Okay, quotes, my name. I'm gonna make my number backwards. Doesn't really matter. And let's just put mine at Evanston, because that's where I'm from. Okay, so right now, if I were to system.out.println, if I wanted to print out your ID number, I would say frank.get ID. And if I wanted to actually change my ID number, I would have to say eric.set ID, and then I would have to change it. Let's just go 55555. And let's show that it actually changed. So then I'll say system.out. Let's do print again, right? Println. And we can say eric.get ID. Okay. So just as a quick review, what have we learned? We've learned that a class is a blueprint for an object. It first starts with what's important to the object, so what is it made out of? You then teach the computer how to build an object, that's called the constructor. And then you also teach the computer how to get information from your object and how to change information from your object. And so you'll always know that there's twice as many of these as you have instance variables, because you'll want to get and set each. So what we've done in the main method is we're just testing out our code to see that it works. So we've made 2 new students, and I'm going to get your ID, I'm going to change my ID, and I'm going to show that my ID has been changed. It's no longer 54321, it's going to be 55555. Okay, so let's run this. And as we can see, yep, there's your ID number, and mine got changed right before I printed it, so it looked like that. Okay, second part. Also, another way that we use classes is just to package a whole bunch of useful information. So this is when we think about a class is a list of things that we want to do lots of times over and over and over again. And so the class just helps us reuse that for us. Obviously, since I'm a math teacher, I'm going to keep this example in the math realm, but it could be a lot of different other things. So instead of calling it list of methods, we're just going to call it right triangle and come up with some functions that you'd use over and over and over again with right triangles. Okay, so let's change it to right triangle. And then it freaks out again. Here's why it freaks out. Because this is called list of methods, and those two names have to match. So I'd say, okay, just rename it for us so that the computer doesn't freak out. This time, though, I'm not creating any variables. Again, my goal is not to create objects. I'm just using the class as a way to reuse functions over and over and over and over again. Now, when you create a function, this is well documented. If you have a textbook, it's definitely in section 1.1 or 1.2 because we have the same textbook. There's 4 key pieces that you need, and I always forget. So I'm just going to watch the error messages, and it's going to tell me. I want this function to be used everywhere, so I'm going to call it public. I also know that since I'm not making objects, I have to use the keyword static. So again, when you're making a function, you want to ask yourself, is this attached to an object, or is this not at all related to an object? So this is not at all related to an object. I'm going to say that it's static. Now I need to communicate what the function's going to spit out. Since we're doing math, we're just going to spit out integers the whole time. And then finally, we need to come up with a name for our function, and I'm going to call it hypotenuse. So as you may have guessed, we're talking about a right triangle, and this program is going to print to the user what the hypotenuse would be. You can see that this is underlined right here because I haven't given it any input variables. Oh, no, it's the return statement. Thank you, Eclipse. We're going to give it 2 inputs, int A and int B. Okay. Let's say that variable, nope, that's my JavaScript going, that integer C is going to be what we want to make. And inside variable C, we will give it the value of A times A plus B times B. Now, of course, this is not what we want. We actually want to take the square root of both sides. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a built-in square root function. So I will say C is actually equal to math.sqrtc. And then I'm going to return C. So the reason why this is underlined right now is we have to tell, ooh, is that a double? It is a double. Okay. Well, let's just make this double then. Long story short, when you take square roots of things, you know that they're messy. So when I used the word integer earlier, that was basically saying, you know, it's got to be a nice number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But we want to include decimals if they happen, so that's why we use the word double. So the reason why they call it double is because it's a whole number plus some extra decimal stuff, so that's like 2 things, and then that's why they call it a double. I don't know, that's kind of weird. So again, this is just one function that I've created. Let's think about maybe something else that we would want to create for a right triangle. Like maybe let's say we wanted to find the area. So again, my goal is not to actually create an object of a right triangle. It's just to give some information and something that I'd want to do over and over again. So I'm going to make this public. I'm going to call it static because I'm not trying to create an object. We'll just have it return a double because who knows, it could have decimals, it could not. And we're going to call it area. Just like last time, let's take our integer A and let's take our integer B. Okay. And this will just be real quick. we're going to have a double, and I'm going to call it area. And I know that area would be equal to A times B divided by 2. And then we will return area. Now, you may have noticed that some of this example is a little bit verbose. We don't actually need all of these lines. For instance, I could write these two statements all as one statement. This is called our declaration, so we're creating a variable, and then this would be called our initialization or our assignment. So I can actually go ahead and delete all of this, and boom, just say right off the bat, hey, I want to make a variable area, and it's always going to be A times B divided by 2. So remember that our whole main method right here, this is just meant to check that our code is going to work. So this can be kind of confused with what's actually running the program. You do this in class because as a beginning student, you don't really have much freedom to run these programs on your own. So it seems like the program's actually running through this, but this is just really to check to make sure that the functions you made work. In industry, let's say, you'll have like hundreds of classes and they all talk with each other. And so you have like this master file that you're actually running the program from, and it's using all of these classes as just an organizational tool. So let's check to make sure our first function works. Let's say hypotenuse, and I have to give it some numbers, so let's say 3, 4. Okay. Now right now this is just going to give me the number 5, so I need to actually print this to the screen so we can see it. So I have to say system.out.println, and then I'm going to stick that back in there. There's another semicolon that auto-generated. Let's just do that a few times. Okay, so another popular right triangle is this. Another one would be, let's say, what is it called again? The 8, 15, 17. So it'll come 17, and then everyone's favorite, but not really anyone's favorite, 7, 24, 25. So again, this will give us 5, this will give us 13, this will give us 17, this will give us 25, if it's working correctly. Let's check to make sure the area works. So I'll just copy all that. Copy. We'll do it down here. And, oh, that did not work the way I wanted it to. Alright, we'll call that area. We'll call that area. That area. And those would not be the areas. This area would be 6. Alright, this one would be 30. This one would be 4 times that, 60. This area would be 84. Alright, so let's just be really friendly. Let's just create another system.out.print. Super friendly. And I'll say the hypotenuse, which is not a real word, are, and let's say something about our areas. The area are, areas. Okay, so let's run this little bad boy. Boom. Our hypotenuse are all of these, and our area are all of those. As you can see, I can math. I am not a charlatan, and we have made our program. So again, here are the 2 things you want to think about when you're thinking about Java. Classes are ways that we can organize information. One job is to create an object that does something. So your object is going to have some instance variables, the things you're keeping track of that make it important. It's going to have a constructor, something for you to create a new object, and it's going to have getters and setters, which are ways that you can access and change information about it. But this is called an object. Sometimes you don't care about objects. Sometimes you just want to make a bunch of useful functions that you know you're going to use over and over again in your life. So your class is really just a tool to group that all together. If that's your goal, you're using the keyword static. You're telling the computer what you want to spit back, and you're naming your function. And in this case, my class has two static methods that can take any information and tell you the hypotenuse, and take any information and tell you the area. And the main method is just a way that you as a programmer can check to see if the code you wrote above is working. But in reality, your programs are using hundreds of classes that all work together in some master file that your application is running on. So this is an overview. I can't believe I spent 20 minutes on it, but I'm sure it was helpful. So I'm going to forward this along, and then I'll actually talk about the homework.